Hey, lifers, Dustin here, and with the third week of the college football season of 2017 under wraps, it's time to take a quick look at the updated Heisman Watch, at least my top 10. So, of course, every week after the week's games, I'm going to take a look at what I think the Heisman race looks like at this point. Of course, it's always a nice disclaimer to put into the beginning that this is after 3 weeks of play. Some teams have only played 2 games. Some teams have actually only played 1, and there's a whole lot of football left to be played until the week after the conference championship games when we actually hand out the Heisman Trophy. And of course, as I'm going through this and telling you about my Heisman hopefuls, let me know your top 5. You can give me your top 10 like I do here, but that's mostly just to keep bubble watch on the other players. Really, I think only 5 people, sometimes only 3 are invited to New York. So let me know down below who your top 5 is. And before I reveal what my top 10 looks like now, let's look at my last week's top 10 and see how they did and performed this week. So my number 10 last week was Rashad Penny, running back of San Diego State. He ran it 32 times for 175 yards, a touchdown. He also tacked on 5 receptions for 31 yards in San Diego State's home upset of Stanford after a blackout. Not the kind where everybody wears black jerseys like in the Louisville game, but the kind where all of the power in the stadium goes out. That brings his season total of 71 rushes, 588 yards. That's 8.3 per rush, by the way. 4 touchdowns, 9 receptions, 69 yards, and a touchdown. Number 9 was Bryce Love, the other running back in that San Diego State game. He ran it 13 times for 184 yards, 2 touchdowns, and had a quick reception for 3 yards. That brings his total to 43 rushes, 524 yards, 4 touchdowns. He is having a 12.2 yards per carry rush average right now, which is absolutely insane, and that reception was his first of the season. Number 8 is Jake Browning, quarterback of Washington. He went 19 of 22 for 255 yards, 4 touchdowns, and no picks Saturday. That brings his season total to 58 of 78, 798, 8 touchdowns, a pick, and a rushing touchdown. He is on pace for what he did last season, at least early on. I had Sam Darnold at number 7 after a tough couple of weeks there at the beginning. Saturday against Texas, he went 28 of 49 for 397, 3 touchdowns, but still has an interception problem with 2 interceptions. His season total was 72 of 108, 1,002 yards, 7 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, and 1 rush touchdown. At number 6, I had Darius Geis of LSU. He ran it 15 times for 76 yards, no touchdowns in the loss to Mississippi State. That brings his season total to 57 rushes, 300 yards, a 5.3 yards per carry average, 4 touchdowns, 2 receptions, 7 yards. Number 5, I had Oklahoma State quarterback Mason Rudolph after his record-setting performance against South Alabama. This week, in a blowout game at Pittsburgh, he went 23 of 32 for 497, 5 touchdowns, and 1 interception, bringing his total of the season to 68 of 94, 1135, 11 touchdowns, 1 pick, and 2 rushing touchdowns. Josh Rosen was the toast of LA over the first 2 weeks of the season. Last week against Memphis, he went 34 of 56 for 463 yards, 4 touchdowns, and did have 2 interceptions, one of them very costly in a pick 6. He ran it 7 times for 32 yards and a touchdown. That brings his season total to a very impressive-looking 91 for 140, 1,283 yards, 13 touchdowns, 2 picks, and 1 rushing touchdown. But unfortunately, losing to a group of 5 team may end up hurting him in the eyes of some voters, particularly Eastern voters who don't get a chance to watch UCLA very often. And when they did, at a noon Eastern time kickoff, they lost to a group of 5 team. Number 3, I had Saquon Barkley. He ran it 10 times for 47 yards. But his big contribution to the blowout of Georgia State was the receptions. He had 4 of them for 142 yards and a touchdown. He is probably the most versatile running back in the country at this point. He has 38 rushes for 307 yards and 3 touchdowns, 11 receptions for 241 yards and 2 touchdowns. After his game against North Carolina, at number 2, I had Lamar Jackson. Against the very highly touted Clemson defense, he went 21 of 42 for 317 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 pick, ran it 17 times for 64 yards. Those stats really are not that bad, but if you watch that game, it was not pretty for Lamar Jackson, especially through the first 3 quarters before Clemson's defense kind of let off the gas when they put in their backups. I believe he started 8 for 20 for 64 yards or something really not that great, and he made up for a lot of that in garbage time. 2 of those 3 touchdowns were in the fourth quarter. His season total now is 76 for 127, 1,088 yards, 8 touchdowns, 1 pick. He's run it 57 times for 303 yards, a 5.3 average, and 3 touchdowns. And my number one, the beginning of the season and after last week, was Baker Mayfield. In the game against Tulane, he went 17 of 27 for 331 and 4 touchdowns. Again, throwing no interceptions, bringing his season total to 63 of 82 for 1,046 yards, 10 touchdowns, and still no interceptions. So after Saturday's performance and watching how the players in my top 10 last week were, I have decided to take somebody out and put somebody else in, as I will probably do every week for definitely the next 4 or 5 weeks until we really get a feel for who the top 5 or so players are in the country, and even then we'll still shuffle them throughout the year. Unfortunately, the player I've decided to take out of my top 10 this week from last week is LSU running back Derrius Guice. Guice only had 76 yards in the loss to Mississippi State. Of course, LSU had to play kind of keep up as Mississippi pulled away during the game, and that probably limited some of his rushes. He had no touchdowns. He only had 15 touches. Just not going to do it, and with teams like Alabama still on the schedule, it may be tough for him down the stretch, a little bit tougher than I thought it might be. This game hurt him a lot, and I've taken him off my top 10. So, who is it that I'm putting into the top 10? I'm not going to lie. My initial feeling coming out of Saturday was that Nick Fitzgerald is a real Heisman contender. His stat line was 15 of 23, 180 yards, 2 touchdowns, 14 rushes, 88 yards, 2 touchdowns. His overall season stats, he has 543 passing yards, 7 touchdowns, 1 pick, 240 rushing yards on 31 rushes and 5 touchdowns. The rushing yards is what's going to propel him the same way it probably did Lamar Jackson. And he still has big games left against Auburn and Alabama and those defenses. He can still move up. There's still a lot for Fitzgerald to prove. But I've actually decided to put in a second player from Penn State, and that is quarterback Trace McSorley. Putting him in there instead of Derrius Guice. His stat line, 18 of 23, 309, 4 touchdowns, and 1 rushing touchdown. His season total, 51 of 76, 753 yards, 9 touchdowns, 2 picks, 137 rushing yards, and 2 touchdowns. So I actually have 2 Heisman Trophy top 10s in one team, in one offense right now. We will see how that works itself out as the season goes on, and it's a really nice luxury for Penn State to have, where if one Heisman Trophy candidate doesn't do as good, maybe the other can help pull the weight. So now I want to let you guys know my top 10 Heisman Trophy ballot. If I had to submit one right now, today, this is what it would look like. At number 10, I have Trace McSorley poking his head in there. We will see what he does as the Big Ten schedule starts this week. We have Sam Darnold of USC. The 6 interceptions just keep killing him, those interceptions. At number 8, I slid Lamar Jackson back from number 2 last week to number 8. It's not the stats. It's the way Clemson's defense took him out of the game. Last year, even in a loss in Clemson, Lamar Jackson super elevated his Heisman chances because of how well he played for the Cardinals in that comeback almost win against Clemson. This year, it was the exact opposite. This game might have sunk his Heisman Trophy chances before September even ends. At number 7, I have Rashad Penny of San Diego State. Number 6, I have Jake Browning of Washington. We will see what the Washington Huskies and Jake Browning are made of as they get into Pac-12 play. Number 5, I still have Josh Rosen, just because he had a loss and just because he had a pick 6 in that game doesn't diminish what he's done for this team or his stats. So right now I still have Josh Rosen in the top 5, though I feel like a lot of voters aren't going to agree with that. But, I mean, if Josh Rosen wins out and UCLA wins the Pac-12 championship, is it really going to matter that he lost by 3 in a game against Memphis in which his stats were still really good? And number 4, I have Bryce Love. Same thing. He now has 2 losses with Stanford against USC and against San Diego State, but his numbers just keep going up and he keeps being impressive. So we will see if there might be a chance for an RG3 type thing where they have multiple losses, a Tim Tebow, where a team has a couple of losses and they still give a Heisman Trophy to a player from that team. I don't think your win-loss should necessarily dictate it, especially for a guy who's not the quarterback and who's not touching the ball on every single play. He is doing everything that's being asked of him right now. At number 3, I have Mason Rudolph of Oklahoma State. Just phenomenal. He has an embarrassment of very athletic riches around him on the offense, and the defense is doing its job so far. Again, we will always see what happens with that in the Big 12 play. Oklahoma State still has Oklahoma, and it'll be a battle between Mason Rudolph and my number 1 in Baker Mayfield. That will be highly entertaining. At number 2, I have Saquon Barkley, running back of Penn State. His big receiving day against Georgia State just shows how dynamic he is in pretty much all phases of the game. So it'll be kind of interesting to see what kind of a dent the running backs can make in this Heisman race against some of the more highly touted quarterbacks. And of course, I have Baker Mayfield, number 1. Dude still hasn't thrown an interception. Led the Sooners into an upset of Ohio State in Columbus. And with Big 12 play starting soon, it will be pretty interesting to see what he can do considering his top receiving threat and his top 2 running backs from last season are gone. This offense is relying on him a lot right now, and he is doing more than I thought would have been asked for him at this point. So he's still my number 1. We'll see what that means going forward. So there you have it, guys. That is my top 10 Heisman Trophy list, like what it looks like after week 3 of college football. Let me know down below what yours looks like. Who do you have in your top 5? If you want to give me a top 10, that's cool too. And who would you give the Heisman Trophy to right now if we knew the apocalypse was coming soon and we knew it wasn't going to be over, but they wanted to give the trophy out for some reason because priorities? Who would you give the Heisman Trophy to? Let me know down in the comment section. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please make sure to give it a big thumbs up. You can click the circle right there in order to subscribe or watch any of the other videos over there to the right that YouTube has suggested for you. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, until next time. I've only played 2 games. Some teams have actually only played 1, and there's a whole lot of football left to be played until the week after the conference championship games when we actually hand out the Heisman Trophy. And of course, as I'm going through this and telling you about my Heisman... Hey, lifers, Dustin here, and with the 3rd week of the college football season of 2017 under wraps, it's time to take a quick look at the updated Heisman Watch, at least my top 10. So of course, every week after the week's games, I'm going to take a look at what I think the Heisman race looks like at this point. Of course, it's always a nice disclaimer to put into the beginning that this is after 3 weeks of play. Some teams are and before I reveal what my top 10 looks like now, let's look at my last week's top 10 and see how they did and performed this week. So my number 10 last week was Rashad Penny, running back of San Diego State. He ran at 32 hopefuls. Let me know your top 5. You can give me your top 10 like I do here, but that's mostly just to keep bubble watch on the other players. Really, I think only 5 people, sometimes only 3 are invited to New York. So let me know down below who your top 5